it sounds bigger than it is. So hold tight with us for a second. It's essentially just the recognition that the relationships, the outcomes we see in the world are very rarely the product of linear relationships. There's oftentimes a lot more going on than we think, and it would behoove us. I don't think I've ever used that word in conversation before, but it would behoove us. It would be to our benefit to at least consider some of the some more of the component parts of any given situation, and try to imagine and look closely at how they are interacting and ultimately leading to the outcomes that we see. So hopefully I'll make that a little more clear by sharing this story. All right, I'm going to share my screen here and begin with a mosquito. So the story begins in Borneo in the 1950s, and essentially, long story short, there was a malaria outbreak, and it was fairly devastating. A lot of people were affected by it. So there's a malaria outbreak. Folks in public health recognized that mosquitoes were the carriers of this disease, and in order to keep people safe, they essentially said, let's get rid of the mosquitoes. Makes total sense. So what did they do? They gassed the mosquitoes, started spraying poison everywhere, started spraying DDT everywhere. And that's fine, or they thought it was fine, because the mosquitoes started to die, until roofs started falling in on people. And some people would think, well, how could that possibly be connected? But people are in their homes, and they're all of a sudden their rooftops start falling in. Well, here's why. These roofs, these thatched roofs, are held together by organic material that was being eaten away at by caterpillars. Those caterpillars all of a sudden were freaking everywhere. And why? Because their predators, wasps specifically, were killed by the sprayed DDT right alongside their mosquito counterparts. So you take away the wasps, the caterpillars take over, and all of a sudden you got rooftops falling in on people. So an example of complex causality, people thought that they were solving a problem, thinking of it in a one-to-one way, not recognize the potential auxiliary, I would say, ripple effects of that single decision, that decision being to gas the mosquitoes. So that was one thing, but really it wasn't the worst of all things. So another concern, another bit of this sort of complex causal situation was now you've got these mosquitoes who are poisoned and thereby poisonous, being consumed by little lizards and small pests in the forest. So a little lizard would eat a poisoned mosquito. That lizard's on its way out, it's poisoned. All of a sudden, the predators of the lizards, the jungle cats, all of a sudden they started to get sick and die from consuming this poison secondhand. Well, what happened there? When the cats died, rats took over. The rats no longer had a natural predator in the jungles of Borneo. And what came with the rats? A wave of the Black Plague. So in hopes, or with the great intentions, with the thought of eliminating or minimizing a malaria outbreak, people in public health in Borneo during this time unintentionally triggered an outbreak of the Black Plague. Now, what was the solution to that? You might be interested. Well, they dropped cats in from the sky. And now, I'm not joking about that. This is not an actual picture, of course. That's just a picture from the internet. But that was actually the answer. They dropped cats from airplanes into the jungles of Borneo to try to control the rat population and stop the spread of the Black Plague. So in other words, what a mess. Okay, it was a wild mess. Now, that sounds complicated, and all these people had really good intentions, and their strategies weren't necessarily bad. But it's possible that maybe we weren't seeing the whole picture with enough clarity. Maybe the folks in charge were seeing with what we call linear causality instead of this complex causality, which is highly relationship-based. It takes all the context of a decision into account before making it. Now, that is challenging. And I think whether it's education, coaching, business, anywhere where you're a leader, a mentor, a decision maker, we're tasked with sorting out those complicated situations. We're also tasked with remembering that we don't always have to be right. And this is a quote that has stayed with us for a while now. People have found it very helpful, reported using it sort of as a mantra in their own practice, remembering that they don't always have to be right, but we should operate thoughtfully, have humility when it doesn't go well, when it's not right, and forgive ourselves and those around us, and be willing to adapt. Because the truth is, these complexities, these relationships, these overlapping variables, they're happening nonstop, whether we think it's too hard to think that way or not. That's the way the world works. We are charged with essentially developing a fitness for thinking in that way to the best of our ability. And I think in order to keep that fitness up, we've got to remember this, that we don't always have to be right, but we should be thoughtful. We should have humility. We should forgive ourselves and those around us. And of course, we should be willing to adapt. So I don't know how people feel about this word, but mindfulness really is what we're talking about. We often refer to it as this idea of practical mindfulness. So as you engage with the world, are you being thoughtful? Are you being patient? Are you practicing those things? And for those of you who are still a little skeptical about the very term mindfulness, maybe think of it as focused attention or just heightening one's state of awareness. In fact, in the mindfulness research, they examine it in two primary categories: focused attention and open monitoring. And if we just think of that one category, focused attention, man, like who wouldn't want to practice that? So without going into necessarily the application to like we've said before, education, coaching, and athletics, but really business, leadership, and mentorship of any kind, I think we have to remember that the world is not as simple as it seems. It's often not as complicated as we think, but it's very rarely as simple as it seems. That big decisions and complicated situations will often require an understanding of this idea, this complex causal idea. And it will, leaders will be called upon to be mindful, to focus their attention, to do their best to be thoughtful and aware in order to unbraid complicated situations, ultimately leading toward best possible outcomes. So again, it is not always easy, but it will most certainly be worth it. And the more you engage with this style of thinking, the greater fitness, the greater capacity for this style of thinking you will develop. So if you ever want help along that journey, or if you ever want to reach out and just talk shop, we're here for you.